has started. So we open up the floodgates. Here we go.
Yes, we'll do that.
Still, I think there are only 7 people on right now.
7?
Yeah. With us.
Including us.
Yeah.
So, well, Marcian's there, so good.
People are starting to come in.
Yeah.
Give them more.
Give him a few minutes.
You can have it at the table.
Does that keyboard work this week? Oh, yeah.
Play around with that as well.
You just got it working. Gentle now.
Careful.
Careful.
Yeah, it does. I feel.
Insert the stuff.
So if you want,
So this is actually. Whoa, that's too full of. How do you get? Oh, you can get rid of it. There you go. And then you go back like this. Cool. Nice. Yeah, we need more meat.
Yeah. I don't think it'll take us a few to figure out how we actually work with it.
We spend a whole hour here just to.
Oh yeah,
that's good.
Mess around with this thing all day.
Yeah.
You just seem a little small though now.
Same as it was before.
No, I mean I think the screen.
The screen?
Oh, the screen.
Yeah.
You want something like a whiteboard, so that's bigger.
It should be the whole wall, really.
Yeah.
All right, folks, it's 10 o'clock. Mark, you want to go ahead and kick this off? Or? We have a bunch still joining, but I think maybe we should go ahead and kick it off.
Mr. Robinson?
What, Mark?
Which Mark?
Yes,
Oh, yeah, we got down.
You talk about Mark.
this is Mark Robinson, yes.
That was Mark Robinson asking Mark Fussell to kick it off.
Oh, okay. Yes, that's going to make sure. Okay, all right. Well, welcome to our 7th Q&A session, the December one, which we do monthly. And if you're in the right place, if you're asking about Service Fabric questions here, although you can probably ask us some general Azure ones as well. And as usual, we just sit in a room. Hopefully you can see us all. We should introduce ourselves. I'm Mark Fussell.
I'm Matt Snyder.
Hi, I'm Voss.
And I'm Megan.
And we make up part of the program management team on Service Fabric. And effectively, it's a fire and Q&A of whatever you want to ask us. Anything's open. If there's stuff that's an NDA we can't talk about, we'll sort of hint at it. But outside of that, any question you want to ask about, whether it's on programming models or infrastructure side of things, or on the Visual Studio tooling side of things, it's all game. So on that note, and on this Christmas edition, I should say holiday edition, then start fire away with your questions.
You want to highlight this one? The link we put in?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead and mention it while you're there.
So yeah, there is this. We just published an article about the support options. We put the link in the whiteboard here, which we will share afterwards. But just very quickly, a reference for all of you, where to report different issues, depending on whether it's production things or other kinds of issues.
I think the interesting one here is the GitHub repo, where you can report particular bugs that you come across. So report things.
But make sure that you don't use this to report production or lifeside issues, because there is no guarantees of when we pick these things up. And then the bottom of this has a section about the supported Service Fabric versions. I don't know if you want to put it.
Yeah, as you see now, what we've been doing is we release regular runtime updates onto the clusters. And as we talked about last time, you have a choice of whether you automatically pick those up or you can choose when you apply them to your cluster. And effectively, we have a rolling window of when they're supported, and older ones drop off the conveyor belt, as it were, as new ones come on. We just published one this week, or 5.4 came out in the last few days, so you'll have seen your clusters upgraded to that. And that one, it's the latest version. As a result of that, the previous version, which was 5.3.311, now has an expiry date set for February the 24th next year. So that effectively what happens when we publish a new one, we set the date for the previous one for when it expires in terms of support. So effectively you have up until that date to basically move forward on your clusters to remain under support.
And when changes or new versions coming out, this is where you go to find those dates going forward.
This is where we'll say going forward, yes. And we're going to try and find a way to publish on an RSS feed as well, so that you can do it programmatically as well, rather than just have to come and look at this page. But this is where we will publish you. They're also put inside the release notes as well.
Cool.
Looks like we had a big question here come in.
Yeah, we need to scroll to actually read the question. So
Oh my. Oh, okay.
where you're
Then you had this prepared. All right.
wow. So what if you just put on your mic and
Yeah, maybe talking with us is better than this one, because it's gonna take us a minute to read this one.
And then we just got dead air. No one likes dead air.
no?
Okay, I hope you can hear me. I'm not sure because my mic is a bit broken.
No, you're great.
That's great.
Okay, that's great. So, I'm trying to deal with geo-replications and protect my cluster from region outage. And now, I wanted to implement some kind of asynchronous replication to the secondary cluster. And the best API I could find up to date is the backup API. I do some checkpoint backups and incremental backups, and then I can, and I do this very often, and then I do this to the Azure Storage GRS, so it is replicated, it is asynchronously replicated to the secondary cluster, not to the secondary cluster, but to the storage, and then when outage occurs, I can start up or have my secondary cluster up and running and induce on data loss procedure, and in that case secondary cluster reads from either the primary or secondary GRS storage, and it goes, but it causes some of there is a quite large window of commits that are not replicated, that might be not replicated to the secondary cluster using this scenario. And I'm thinking about some better solutions using some passive passive secondary cluster and in-memory asynchronous replication. Could you help me somehow in this scenario?
Yeah, I mean, so we've seen people build this a bunch of different ways, and the solution that you end up with does depend a lot on what your requirements are around the consistency and availability of that data. So as you've noticed, yeah, this will work fine, but first of all, you have some manual operation where you have to kind of poke your secondary cluster and say, hey, you're actually in charge now. That's kind of one.
Can I break here? That's perfectly okay, the manual operation, because it's quite a big decision okay, region outage happens very rarely, not very often. It's quite...
it's a disaster.
It's a disaster, yes, and it's just a manual procedure to go to the secondary region and turn things on. And it is our decision to assess if this is a long-running outage or it is a short outage, and if it is worth to sacrifice some consistency for availability. Because sure. If we wait through the outage and we lose the availability, we have full consistency. So it's like decision about this sacrifice.
Yep.
And trade-off.
Yep, it's a fair point. It's just one of those things where there has to be somebody paying attention in order to make that call, which is fine. The other thing, as we were saying, it's just about kind of your decision around consistency or availability. So we've seen people do it via storage, like what you're doing. For those that require a little bit higher guarantees, we've seen services that are effectively configured as clients to your secondary cluster. So in your primary cluster, your really doing two things. A call comes into the service, you replicate it via the normal APIs, but then you also send it kind of in a batch or asynchronously to the service, kind of its clone in the other data center, right? So that the state is always hot there.
I'm a bit afraid of this solution because if I use the checkpoints and the underlying replication, I have partition level consistency in terms of the order of methods being called. I am afraid that there is a too big risk that the data will get inconsistent during the API level replication.
Yes, you would have to figure out how to make that consistent or deal with idempotency or reordering of those events in case they are delivered out of order or delivered multiple times. The way that we see people get around that usually is you stamp some sequence number on each operation so that it can get reordered arbitrarily, and then the clients to the other side can reorder it into the correct order and then apply it. It's just another way of doing it. The real long-term solution that we want to get to here is a service fabric cluster that can itself span the regions so that you eliminate all of these problems, right? You don't have the human intervention, you do have fast failover, you do have full consistency. That's really what we want to get to. It is buildable today, but it's not a supported topology yet because of some other things that we're working on. Not in terms of Service Fabric, but just really the operational side of it. So setting up good guidance with Traffic Manager, figuring out what happens to your logs, all that type of stuff.
Right now, to do the one right now.
So if I understand correctly, you want to implement synchronous replications across multiple regions?
Yeah, it's never really synchronous. It's your transaction is async still. Everything is still async, but it might take a little bit longer. It's just that your replica is further away, right? So it's like, imagine that some of the replicas have slightly greater latency, and it happens to be that's because you're shipping the data to a different region. But there's nothing that really changes about how it works. It's just like the replicas in a different rack within the same data center. It's just that now, if that data center does fall off the grid temporarily, it's just like a machine outage in a single region, right? Basically, you don't have to do anything special, and the important part is you don't have to go do anything at the application layer. So all the code that you have today around checkpointing to storage and then having to pull it back and having to figure it all out and dealing with the data loss, all of that kind of goes away, as does the manual intervention step. So that's kind of the North Star. That's what we want to get to. It's just not quite there yet. And again, it's mainly because of those operational aspects, like just how do you run and administrate such a cluster.
So it's I'm not really convinced that this is a good solution because in nearly in 99% of time the region is up, and we can benefit that all the replicas or the secondary replicas that are needed to confirm a write are in the local data center. So and we have a really low latency to make sure this write happens. But what would be really helpful, in my opinion, is to be able to configure such two clusters, one in one data center and one backup cluster, and have the same APIs that are used for local replication synchronously to be used for asynchronous replication. So by asynchronous replication, I mean replication that does not require confirmation, write confirmation. Yes. So you can replicate this these commits asynchronously in an ordered way to the secondary data, to the secondary cluster, and and from my point of view, and I would definitely prefer such behavior in a large scale than geo spanning cluster with nodes in different regions and so on.
Sure. For example, all we're saying is that there's a spectrum. Some applications will require that full consistency, others won't. And
Because-
it's going to be up to you guys to be which one you want to build. We've thought of we've also thought of the async thing, and that is something that we're looking into. If you've ever looked at Cassandra's replication modes, we have that kind of as a guidance for the types of options that we want to make available. There's no plans or a timeline for that at this point, but it is something that we're aware of. So good feedback, and this continues to be one of the big
good
things
thing,
that we need to tackle.
good example for me is the document DB replication consistency models, especially bounded staleness. It's something I would really love to see in two-cluster service fabric configuration.
Yep. Yes. Good feedback.
Okay, we're going to move on
Let's scroll down to the
to
question.
another question now.
That was the big one. So Phil.
Phil. Oh, hi, Phil. Good to hear from
Phil.
you again. Long time no see. Been away for a while, yep. Standalone.
Why did it doing that?
Might have to copy it over.
Don't.
No, it's okay. Standalone clusters currently will
Just keep
support
it.
containers. Containers on standalone clusters.
Yes, so it's the answer to this one. So in the 5.4 release that we've just pushed out this week, there is container support. It's still in preview mode, and what that means is in Windows Server 2016, you can now get the version of Windows Server 2016 that supports containers. So there's a version for it on Azure, or you can enable it as a feature on the standalone version. And now you can build a Docker container. Has to just have guest executables in it at the moment, so there's no Service Fabric runtime. And then when you push that container into Docker Hub or whatever repository it is, think of it almost identical to how you launch and have a manifest that looks like for guest executables. Instead, inside there we have a thing called container host, which references an image, and you can pull those down. So yes, if you take Windows Server 2016, deploy it on clusters, enable containers inside them all, now you can deploy and
Yeah, you can start kicking the
inside
tires on it. It hasn't reached GA yet, but that's mainly the container support side, not the rest of the runtime. 2016 is supported fine. It's just the container integration part that we're still working on. But please try and give us feedback, Bill.
Yeah, and the reason why we just put in previews, we're just waiting for this release just to stabilize, and then in the next release we'll have, we intend to make those features in GA available for how you launch containers. And you'll see a lot more container support coming inside Service Fabric for making containers first class.
And in the 0.4 version of the SDK and tooling, there's a template in Visual Studio to help you get around the manifests you need to actually deploy.
Yes, if you go into your new Service Fabric project, you can choose a container option inside there.
Yeah.
And I'm about to publish a sample doing this week. So I've got a sample. I'm afraid that there isn't a sample in the getting started at the moment. So I've got one ready to go. I'm finishing it off today. So probably by Monday, because I'll do it over the weekend most likely, you'll see a sample published into the Getting Started repo of how to do these containers. Okay, so that was that one. What's the next one?
Hey,
There it is. Look at that. It works. Fantastic. All right.
Just starting to save these.
It's going to scroll away from me otherwise. So typical Service Fabric cluster configuration. So front the cluster with an Azure load balancer for obvious reasons. Documentation notes has a notion of an application gateway, sometimes mentioned. Can you please explain? Okay. So this is always
Picture time.
This is always a point of confusion. So we're going to draw a picture for this one. Okay. Yeah. This is great.
You need to do red.
Which one's red?
Yeah.
Oh, Christmas colors. Yeah, there you go. All right, so the idea is you have a cluster here, and then you have a Azure load balancer out front. So this is kind of your typical configuration, and this is your VNet here. And then your load balancer exposes some endpoints out to the internet, and then load balancer goes and just kind of sprays traffic at all the nodes. So that's generally what happens. So the application gateway, just to disambiguate this, there are a few things we call application gateway. There is a feature called Azure Application Gateway, and that is a separate feature outside of Service Fabric that you can use. An application gateway, this essentially sits outside of your VNet, and so you can this has some features in it that allows you to manage traffic, but the traffic still ends up going through the VIP and through the load balancer. Then there's another Azure feature called Azure API Management, which is a similar thing, but it's a little bit more geared towards actually managing APIs for web apps, mobile apps, anything else that you want to do. It has features for, traffic throttling, automatically generates documentation, and again, that also goes right through your VIP and out to the public internet this way. And then there is a service fabric feature that we used to call application gateway, and maybe this is where most of the confusion comes in, and now we call this reverse proxy. And reverse proxy is something that actually sits inside your cluster on the nodes itself. So you can think of it like a service that just sits inside here. Okay. And that's going to sit on all the nodes, basically. But generally, when we talk about a gateway pattern, all that means is that inside your cluster here, you're going to have some stateless service, something stateless in here to act as the entry point for all the traffic that comes in through the load balancer. And again, the reason you do that is because generally you're going to have some stateful services off in the back end here. But the problem with stateful services is you have one primary and a couple secondaries, and the load balancer is sending traffic to every node, but you really want the traffic to just come to your primary here. So that's kind of a simple case, but that's essentially what happens. And so in order to do that properly, there's some stateless service that's always required that you're required to have at the beginning here at the front. It serves as a gateway for traffic, and it's in that service where you make decisions about what other services to send traffic to, what partition to send it to, so all your partition resolution, partition key hashing, all that stuff. That should all happen in here, so that it's not exposed out to the internet, because you obviously don't want your clients out on the internet to be in control of partition resolution. They might do malicious things like write data to the wrong partition, for example. So you want to be in control of that. So the gateway pattern we talk about is generally this service that lives inside your cluster that's stateless and acts as a front end to all of your back end services. That's what we mean.
And things like Azure App Gateway, API management, even things like event hubs or just the standard load balancer, those are more about how do you get calls from clients, which are outside of the cloud entirely, up into Azure and connect them up to the actual cluster and start routing them appropriately. Yeah. And depending upon where those client calls are coming from and what types of clients they are, maybe an event hub, maybe an IoT hub, or maybe something like API management or app gateway will be more appropriate. So you'll pick kind of that entry point based on those client-side requirements or what makes sense. And then once you get it into the service fabric cluster, that's where this notion of what we've called an application gateway or something like that is necessary to do the routing that Voss described.
Right. Now, one thing we're working on currently that's...
just to complete, what's the role of the reverse proxy?
The reverse proxy, yeah, it's basically the same thing. So the reverse proxy kind of, it's sort of an automatic front-end gateway in that it can take it's for HTTP only, but for HTTP URLs that are in the format of HTTP, your cluster on the gateway port, whatever that is. If you do this URL format, which is your application name and your service name, it will automatically take that and forward it on to an HTTP endpoint on service that corresponds to that name. So generally, now you can do a couple things with this. You can use that for just internal routing between services, and we think it's very useful for that. So if you have a large number of services and they all talk over HTTP, then you can essentially route your traffic through the reverse proxy so that the services themselves don't have to do service name resolution, which turns out to be pretty difficult.
Or bind against our API.
Yeah, or bind against our API, yeah, exactly. It's actually very good if you're writing in other languages or you have guest executables where you don't have the Service Fabric SDK and you don't have our APIs available. You can send HTTP traffic to other services via the reverse proxy. And it will do the service resolution for you. So it'll find when you send this request here, it'll find the other service and just forward that traffic on. So that's generally what that's used for. Now, regarding Azure API management, one thing we're exploring right now and that we're kind of working on is taking Azure API management and essentially extending the VIP so that or the VNet so that Azure API management lives inside your VNet, and it will also be able to do service resolution the way that the reverse proxy does. So that way, when traffic comes in, ultimately when traffic comes in to Azure API management, it doesn't have to go through the load balancer and to a gateway. It can go directly to a backend service. And so that's the kind of integration that we're looking at now. So you can bypass these additional hops just by hooking up API management. So that's in the pipe. It's not available today, but it's something that we're working on to make this process all a little bit easier.
Yep. Cool. Let's see what's next.
Thanks, guys. So to actually achieve resolution there, via the naming service, you're saying, or it sounds like you're saying that on each node, we either need to implement a stateless service to obtain that endpoint resolution, or go via reverse proxy. Is that correct?
So the stateless service is only required for ingress traffic that's coming in through the load balancer and through the bit.
Yeah, for things that don't have direct connectivity to the backing services.
Right.
Yeah. If
right,
you don't
exactly.
want the client to actually know the naming scheme of the URLs that the reverse proxy is supposed to.
It's an abstraction.
If you look at the simplest sample, we have that word count sample, which is a very simple example where it has a web front end and a back end, and that web front end just renders a page. And it's like a gateway. In other words, it's a web page that renders it to talk to a backend. As a simple example that you might build.
Right. But for backend services to talk to each other, you don't need a stateless service to go through. They can actually communicate directly to each other if they want to, but they have to figure out first where the service is that they want to talk to. So they have to do that resolution first.
Which means that you could be using one of the built-in communication mechanisms that we provide, like the HTTP one or the service proxy one. Or you could be doing that code, the resolve code, manually. Either way will work fine.
And the other thing that we're looking towards as well next year is we're also thinking of hosting DNS service inside nodes inside the cluster. So, like the reverse proxy allows you to talk to things, you can have a DNS name point, which is a fixed name point for things as well. So you just refer to it as a DNS name.
Yeah. Today, for those of you that are familiar, you know that the process is that your service goes off, talks to a naming service, asks where's this service that I want to talk to. The naming service responds with an address, and then you go and talk to that address directly. And that's kind of the process you have to do today. And it's not the easiest code to write in the world, and so that's why we're doing all this stuff to make that a little bit easier. So again, the reverse proxy allows you to bypass this step, and the DNS name resolution will also allow you to bypass this step in certain cases.
It does the same thing.
But once you're inside the cluster, you have a lot of options for how you want services to communicate. If traffic is coming in from outside, it doesn't have a lot of options because it can't talk directly to one of these nodes, which has an internal IP address, something like that. It has to talk just through your VIP, and so it has to go into the load balancer, and the load balancer also doesn't know about services. It only knows about machines, VMs, and so it's just going to send it to a random VM, and you better have a service there listening, otherwise the request is just going to get dropped. And so that's what that gateway pattern is.
Let's move on.
All right, let's move on here.
We gotta pick it up. Down.
Thank you.
No problem.
No problem.
So,
So new version 5.4.145 of SDK has been released, but there has been no blog post.
Yes, the blog post is coming.
but the question is if there's anything super interesting in that blog.
Yeah, there's actually quite a bit. Yeah, there's a lot of it.
So you should look forward to reading it.
Yeah, I think async application package registration. That should make everyone should be happy about that. No more timeouts on register service fabric application package. That should make everyone's lives a little easier.
Yes, container support is one we talked about just now.
The reason the blog's not out is because there's so much in there. It took us so long to write it.
Yeah, the bits are just still percolating.
But yeah, it's on the way.
Yep.
Okay. Are task continuations a subject to the actor's turn-based concurrency? Let's see. No. Okay, I see. So you're saying, right? Yeah, you've got a task, and then you say continue with, and then you run an action in here, and whatever this action is, this code right here does not run within the actor turn-based concurrency. In fact, this is bad to do in an actor for a number of reasons. So once you do this, essentially what you're doing is you have your method here.
Yeah.
And this you're going to say continue with, and this is going to run at some point, but this will exit. So your method will exit here, which means that the lock around it has been released, so you're no longer in a turn. And it also means this, whatever happens within this block in an actor method, is actually running within a transaction. And that's so that you can apply rights to your actor. So this is all within a transaction, but the scope of this is now running out here. So you're no longer in a transaction. How did I turn green? That was cool.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So basically, when you run code in a continue with, you're no longer in a transaction, which means you cannot do writes. So if you try to write state into your actor state manager here, that'll fail because you're outside the transaction.
But now you might accidentally modify local variables or do some other things, and just generally it's not recommended because yes, it's not protected.
Right. Absolutely. And also since this runs outside of the scope of an actor method, it also means that it no longer counts towards the the time limit for garbage collection. So you might be running code in here, and we might garbage collect the actor in the meantime. So this is definitely not recommended in most cases.
Yep.
So I would avoid doing that.
Okay.
What else do we got here? So, how well are stateful services supported when using .NET Core? So today we don't have .NET Core support for stateful services. It's something we're working on, but only .NET full framework for stateful. You can do ASP.NET Core projects, but you have to compile against full .NET framework. So that's something that's coming. I think not quite sure.
I don't have a good timeline for when that's going to light up finally, but it is something we're working on.
Yeah, we're working very hard towards this actually for .NET Core support for stateful.
Yep.
All right.
That's Sander replying to Sergey, which is correct. Yep. They run outside.
And there's another from Marcin.
All right. Oop.
Oh boy.
Yeah. No, I think you had it. No.
There it is.
I'm sorry, guys, for the
No,
pitch
it's
lag.
okay. Thank you for coming prepared.
Yes.
On the other hand, this is a wall of text. All right.
That is a lot
Maybe
of
you should
text.
talk.
You might want to talk to this one actually, Marcin, if you can.
Okay, so let's assume we have a working service that consists of durable service and volatile service. So we have durable service on the lowest tier. So it contains all the data that is durable and important okay. And up on the upper tier we have volatile services, multiple volatile stateful services that in a way caches the data from the durable services. So everything in the volatile services is consistent with the underlying services, but can be retrieved from the durable services in case some data loss occurs and so on. So the question is, whenever the cluster functions correctly, all the data is consistent and with the durable services, and everything works correctly. But suddenly, if data loss occurs, we have to invalidate all the data in volatile stateful services, including actors and so on. So we can regain the consistency with the underlying storage. So, what is the best way to do this invalidation? The best.
The mechanisms you have at the bottom there, either a graceful invalidation that you send kind of as an explicit action, or looking at the data loss number and then triggering it off of that, are probably the best ways.
What do you think about this start partition data loss in all the dependent partitions?
I mean, are they going to be restoring from actual backups?
No, they will just drop the caches. All the cached and data inside in the all data loss.
I don't know that on data loss is necessarily the place to do it. Are you saying that the dependent ones, you call on data loss on them?
Yes.
Or you're saying, yeah. I don't know. On data loss should really generally be preserved for real things, and I don't know that you want to mix your application logic, drop all the data path with the actual service fabric invoking, hey, we think you might have lost data, maybe do a backup restore path. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it's why I'm not convinced. But the data loss is quite unusual situation, and I'm not sure if I should implement all complex logic just to handle some exceptional situation that is not really often.
Well, but then that's fine. But then make sure that when you do get into that situation, that things don't get corrupted or your services don't get horribly stuck, right? That's what you want to avoid. So it's fine if you say you don't want to handle it, but you kind of have to handle it at least a little bit in order to make sure that things don't go completely sideways. But anyway, if you're going to do it, I think the explicit operation outside of on data loss, triggered either by those two mechanisms you have at the bottom, would be good.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right, and then Sergey, just to clarify here, Sergey asks, so in other words, in order to be subject to turn-based concurrency, a method must be on an actor interface. Not necessarily. The way to think about it is, in order to be subject to the turn-based concurrency, the method must be invoked by the actor framework.
Yeah.
So it's either on the interface, which means it's a call from an actor proxy, or it's coming from from an actor reminder or a timer, or it's one of the activate or deactivate async methods that are on the actor. Those ones, basically, they have to be invoked by the framework, and then they're part of the turn-based concurrency. So, just to clarify on that. Okay.
I think you missed one. Go scroll.
Did we?
It scrolled again.
Yeah,
Oh, it's scrolled. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say that was. I remember there being more questions than that.
Yeah, keep
We're fighting.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
no. You need to keep going.
This one, okay.
This one, yeah.
From
How should I
Prashant.
think
Okay.
about
From
database?
Prashant.
Yes.
Yeah. How should I think about database where I have 100 gigabyte size with service fabric? Should we prefer the active model or reliable collections?
I mean, is that 100 gigabytes all totally independent rows? Like, is it 100 gigabyte of independent rows, or is it 100 gigabytes of data that you actually want to do like queries and aggregations and computations on top of? Yeah. I would say that just that much data is probably automatically disqualifying you from using actors unless it's very unstructured and independent. I think we recommend that. I mean, certainly that is way too much for a single actor, and it's way too much for a single collection. So you're probably looking at a partitioned stateful service with some set of collections inside of it for a data set of that size. But again, it also really depends on what you're using it for.
Generally, keep your actors smaller in size. Don't put huge amounts of data in them, and they're very independent.
Yeah.
As far as
and reliable services is usually the best place to start.
Yeah.
And think of that first. Actors are usually in particular scenarios where you can have just lots of little independent things that you know won't interact with other services quite so much.
But also think about what problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, what are you really?
Why are you trying to move out of your database?
Right.
Because if you don't have a problem you're trying to solve, you're just going to incur cost for no reason.
Yes.
Yeah.
And databases are still good as backends as well, yes?
Yeah.
So don't disregard that. I can still use a backend database.
Yeah. If you're trying to move out of the database for reasons like that database isn't scaling, or you want to be able to upgrade your code faster, there's a whole bunch of reasons why you might decide to come out of the database. But in general, be very careful when you're making that type of large migration, because you do lose things by moving from a database to a partitioned stateful service. It's not, you don't lose the high availability, you don't lose the availability, you don't lose the safety of the data, but you do lose things like query, in particular is one of the big things that you kind of get rid of. I mean, also just frankly, you lose some of the standard tools that exist for viewing and modifying data inside of databases that you end up having to write code yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's all these features that databases provide, right?
Right.
Like management studios where you can just do arbitrary queries.
Right.
See
Ad
what's
hoc
in
stuff
there.
across all sorts of places.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And even doing things like primary keys and secondary keys, yeah, you can do those with dictionaries, but there's no software that forces the constraints the way databases do.
Yep.
And the other note about the size, when you're thinking about size, 100 gigabytes or something in hardware configuration, keep in mind, take that number, multiply it by at least 3 for the number of replicas that you're going to have, and then also add an additional 20% overhead on top of that, so that you can afford to lose a machine and not run out of space.
Yeah, you can
make
handle
sure you have
failovers and
yeah.
upgrades and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a little more overhead to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see where we are here.
Where are we?
Yeah, no,
Up more.
Up.
Kill. Steve, kill. Yeah. There we go.
Yep.
Okay. So that's again with the actors. And Marcin has another question here.
Marcin wants to know about Paxos. We don't run Paxos. We have a completely different algorithm. It's distributed, and it would take a PhD thesis in an afternoon to go through. Maybe ping me, and
We have 22 minutes.
I have 22 minutes, and I will bore the rest of the room to tears.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
but you can think of it as like every single partition is its own little replica group and has its own notion of progress, and there isn't really a lot of coordination across them. So that second part is fine. So there isn't really a lot of dependencies on leader election or things like that outside of that replica set. But there's a whole bunch of caveats, addendums, and details in there. But yeah, think of it as something more like that. That's why we can have thousands of services in the clusters, they're all independent, right? So let's see where we are here. Man, this IAM window thing is really rough.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any security reasons to utilize App Gateway API management as a public source of the API versus hosting the API in Service Fabric? Yeah, those services inside of Azure already have a ton of features around monitoring your API, figuring out what your most common usage is, securing them, doing DOS protection.
You can do authentication there, right?
Yes, you can do auth there, you can do authentication, you can do DOS protection. Those are features that you would have to build yourself, and those are never simple features to build yourself. So that's kind of why we say, hey, if these things look good to you, I mean, the downside is, of course, as we pointed out, some of them are additional things to manage. Some of them end up sitting outside your cluster, and so there may be a slight performance implication to having another hop in there. Some of them cost money, depending on how heavily you're using them. So there are pros and cons, but generally we kind of caution people against trying to write their own complete gateways from scratch, just because, especially if you're doing security and management and things like that inside of there, that's kind of gnarly code that is complicated to get right and critical to the success of these services.
Okay. All right. Next question is, where can I get the release notes for SDK 2.4?
Sean!
1.45?
He's working on it.
He's literally posting the blog.
Sean is doing it right
We're just
now.
giving him
Yeah.
crap.
Yeah,
so
they're on the way. They're on the way.
We're sorry.
Today.
Today.
We're sorry, and we say we're sorry to both you and
20
Sean.
minutes, yeah.
We're just checking if people are paying attention.
Yeah. It appears you're
It
paying
works.
attention.
All right.
That's good.
Okay. What do we got next here?
This
This window's horrible. This is so bad. I know.
There you go.
There you go. Is it possible to see what we're writing on the whiteboard? Can nobody see the whiteboard? Seriously? Oh, that'd be bad.
I'm in the meeting here. I can see it.
You can see
Okay,
it? Okay.
I think you just have to pop up the whiteboard option to
There's
see
a
what
button
is
for it or
being displayed. I think
Okay.
it should be one of the options within Skype.
Yeah, okay. That's good. Otherwise, you'd have missed our cool Christmas drawings. Okay, what do we got next? Is there any tool to monitor capacity and load of a cluster? Oh, yes. I see Vaslav has a work in progress on GitHub for Sorry X-Ray. Bit more info on this. Okay.
Time in milliseconds, percentage spent in each actor.
For example, if possible, monitor the time in millisecond percentage spent in each actor method. Well, okay.
Perf counters.
So, yeah. So there are a couple things. So the tool that I have up on GitHub is just kind of using the Service Fabric query APIs just to show you visually what's happening in the cluster in general, but it doesn't dive deep into what's happening in your code. So in an actor method or a Service Fabric or a reliable collections method doesn't show you that. So it's just kind of visualization. The capacity stuff is also available in Service Fabric Explorer up at the cluster level. There's a tab you can go to that shows you capacities and metrics there. So some of that's available there also. Now, for actually looking inside your service for things like percentage time spent in each actor method, that you would really go to performance counters, which actually we already spit out quite a few of those. If you look at, if you open up perfmon, you'll see a lot of perf counters for actors. You'll see some for, I think there's some for reliable collections now.
There's some basic ones for reliable collections. We're working on adding more.
You should post a link to your X-ray tool.
And then,
Yes.
yeah, I can post that.
Yeah,
can
but
post that
I think
link
the
for
key
sure.
point is that the X-ray thing is really only looking at basic query stuff that's coming out of the cluster resource manager in terms of
Right.
load metrics that you are reporting and basic placement options that exist for your services. So it's
Yeah.
just looking where things are. If you're looking for detailed things like milliseconds spent per method, you're going to want to go to something like perf counters, or you're going to want to run your code under the Visual Studio profiler so that you can see kind of where your time is spent and where the complexity is coming from.
Right.
I think those are probably the most straightforward ways forward.
Right. The X-ray tool is really just, it's Service Fabric Explorer with a slightly different view on it. It's a different view of the same information.
We have the public stuff.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
is a
they're
public
on the
docs,
docs, yeah.
especially for actors. There's a pretty good set of them.
Yeah.
Did we skip things?
We did, yes.
Okay. Or not?
Where were we? Plan.
Yeah,
or-
I think we're here. Do you plan AV2 instances for Service Fabric? They are available now, yes.
They should
So,
be.
so you can actually do them through ARM. When will they appear in the portal view?
That will, I guess, happen soon inside the new year. We're just working through that. But
Yeah.
all of the instances that you want to use are available through ARM. So effectively, we always recommend that you build your cluster really through an ARM deployment model. So effectively, you can go through the portal and at the very end, download the ARM template that you want, then save that, open it up, and then deploy that way. They'll be in the portal sometime in the new year.
All right.
See here?
Hans has a newbie question,
Well, we'll see.
which probably will not turn out to be a newbie question at
Yeah.
all. Okay. So he says he's finding conflicting answers about this. All right. So if you start a transaction and add to a reliable dictionary using add async, is the change actually replicated to other nodes before commit async returns?
Yes. Every single operation is replicated at the time it is performed, but they are not, in transaction terminology, they are not unlocked until the commit succeeds everywhere. So say you have 100 operations, 100 adds in this transaction. As you're doing each of them, we're replicating that change, but nobody can see that change until the commit comes through. So they don't get all batched up, because then you'd have a big single message on the wire, and if that one message fails, then we have to retransmit the whole set of things that were included in that transaction. So we do send them at the time that you perform them. There is some batching and other things under the hood, but basically you can think of them as they're all set independently, but they're not visible, they're not unlocked, they're not applied until the commit actually returns. So hopefully that's a good answer. And that answer makes sense. In terms of fast, slow, it doesn't make a huge difference. It's mainly about retransmission and failures. No.
Although we do some batching with, if you have multiple transactions on
In flight, yeah.
in flight on the same collection, the same partition, those will get batched up for you underneath the covers. So if you open up, say, 10 transactions simultaneously, we will batch those up internally. So it's just kind of a small optimization.
So next question, is it possible to leverage Docker data volumes within Service Fabric? We have a client who wishes to port their existing MySQL database and run it in a container in Azure Service Fabric. Service Fabric doesn't do anything special at all in terms of interfering with containers. So if you want to create a Docker container and use data volumes within inside that, that's just purely a feature of Docker itself and of the container that you've deployed. In this current release in 5.4, you can just deploy a set of container images now. And if those container images are using Docker data volumes, then yes, it'll just download and deploy that container image just like any other container orchestrator that you might come across. So yes, that's perfectly viable. We don't have support anything yet for Service Fabric runtime inside there. So you're just talking about being MySQL and using data volumes. So yes, you can do that. It's just a Docker feature, nothing to do with Service Fabric, unless there's something particular on Service Fabric you were running into. We will support Service Fabric runtime inside containers going forward for its statefulness as well. So you'll be able to have stateful services running inside that, but that's coming next year. Okay. Any update on application logging?
Well, it's also expect updates soon. Dev experience is great, but production experience, especially across node, is not great.
Really want to stream logs.
Really want to stream logs. Yeah, you can only, so from production, if you want to hook into the stream and see like a live stream, you can only do it per node from Visual Studio today. But you can have those logs being picked up and shipped to some other services. It won't be a live stream, but you can have Windows Azure Diagnostics picking up the ETW traces and have them shipped off to either storage account, replication insights, even Event Hub. So those are the options available.
Yeah, and then there's a event flow, yes, but
that's more about collecting and shipping them out. So you might want to take a look at event flow. It's go to NuGet package and search for Microsoft Event Flow. It's a library that you can use, so you can have the event sources that you send out from your service. You can use this event flow library to configure if they should be decorated or if they should be consolidated and where you actually set them to. The way that it's created is you're going to specify a specific output via another library, and there exists a different set of libraries for different sets of outputs. So I'm not sure if any of the outputs today would be able to support you a live stream doc, but maybe take a look at that. That might be a model to solve that.
But I guess the app insights integration and that side of things is still in progress.
We're working on improving what we can do today, because everything you do today goes through Windows Azure Diagnostics, yes, the white agent. But we want to improve that, and even having event flow as part of that as well.
Okay. The docs mentions string and GUID actor IDs are hashed in 64-bit long. Is this done only for deciding which partition to create the actor in, or is the address of the actor actually the hashed version, the long?
It's the partition.
Yeah.
That's essentially the partition key. If you notice, if you create an actor service, we auto-generate a default service definition for you, and you'll see that the partition scheme for that is defaulted to N64 min to N64 max, and that's required because we use the full N64 partition key range to partition actor services on. So when you create a new actor, whatever actor ID you use, it always ends up falling into that N64 key range, and so that determines which partition the actor goes into.
Okay, is it possible to combine actors and a collection in the same service?
Well, that's a good question. So today, no. But in the future, that may actually be something you can do.
Yeah.
That may be something you can do. But
right
today you don't do that though. Today it's
separate service.
It would be two separate services. Yeah.
Okay, for on-premise, I'd like to add message broker for async service communication. There is a so answer that the Windows Service Bus is not compatible because it runs on an old version of Service Fabric. What do you recommend for adding a QM application on Windows Server? Yes, you're correct in that you cannot run Service Bus on-premise on the same set of machines that you run Service Fabric on it, because that Service Bus actually has a very super old version of Service Fabric built into it. You can run it on a separate machine and use it to poke into your cluster and do it that way. You just can't run it on deploy on the same set of machines. And in terms of recommended service broker, well, that's the only one that runs on premise. I guess you could. I'm trying to think of other service brokers. I mean, that's the only one that.
There's nothing really inside the cluster that's going to work today. You'd have to go to some external service like Service Bus or Event Hubs or something like that. You could also deploy other message queuing systems inside the cluster if you can package them up as a Service Fabric application.
There's RabbitMQ. I mean, there's other queues you can deploy and use those, but not a service broker.
Depending on, I don't know of anything like a message broker. What we would probably say today, unfortunately, is that the closest thing is we have in Purview reliable concurrent queue. You could build something like that, but then you're effectively building your own message broker as a service inside the cluster.
Yeah,
so you use reliable concurrent queue. You'd have many readers and writers to that reliable concurrent queue service, and you would be dispatching calls to other services based on that. But that's probably the best thing.
If you run Service Bus on premise or Service Bus 1 run for Windows Server on another machine, that's the way to do it.
That's another way to do it.
Yeah. What characters are valid for string-based actor IDs?
Well, any Unicode character that you can put into a string should be valid.
Yeah.
There are no invalid.
I don't know of
characters.
any. I don't have any limitations.
And anything you can put into a .NET string. Remember, it all just ends up getting hashed into a number, anyways.
Yeah.
Do you have an ETA when Service Fabric will run on Nano Server? This is slowed down a little bit just because there's still work that's happening inside the core CLR team that we're dependent on, and some of that work. It's got a time frame of like Q1 of next year, so we're sort of waiting on that.
I think we'll have more updates around then.
Yeah, so we'll have more updates round about then, really. So,
but I don't think we have any hard information.
We haven't got any hard dates on this at the moment because there's dependencies there. Okay.
Perf canners.
Perf canners have been brought in. I've been brought into my solution anytime soon.
So you can get them in there today. I don't know what brought into. So you can use OMS today. There are some hiccups with OMS and with application insights as well, but we're working on smoothing out that experience. Today, they do go into apps insights, ops insights, and OMS, but there's no real strong integration. That's something that we're going to
I'm
work
just
on.
trying to think of, I don't know if you know, Mikkel, whether perf counters. There's an OS solution for Service Fabric, and it takes our system event stream where we push everything out into Diagnostics.
It does the traces, but it doesn't do the perf counters.
No, it doesn't do the perf counters. That's right. But and then what the event flow and the things I talked about before is also based on all the event flow things.
Yeah. So I will follow up. We'll follow up and find out what's happening with the MS solution on perf counters. I don't know the answer to that one just yet. When it'll be brought in.
Retiming actor internals again. Perpmon is okay for dev, or whilst RDP at the node. What is the approach for Azure deployed on-prem with multiple nodes? I think it's just perf counters. If you look in our documentation, and if you can't find it, let us know. There is an article on the actor performance counters. You can see what ones are available, and you can use those. Collecting those across multiple nodes and exporting them into something that lets you look at them is really the way to do it today.
I'm pretty sure OMS had some general features for collecting those perf counters across nodes.
Yes.
And surface those.
Yes.
That's one of their main purposes in life.
Yep.
To monitor nodes. So they have solutions to that.
Yep. Yeah. Managed ASF offering. I think that this is the notion that you don't have to run your own cluster and you just get some subset of machines that we manage for you.
Yes.
I know it's something that we're still looking at. We haven't really honestly started much work in that direction, but it is something we know we need to build and want to build eventually. Can Service Fabric pass messages, calls as references across services actors as opposed to serialized, deserialized over the network or RPC? I don't think we have any mechanisms that would support that today. You could somehow build your own transport that would let you do that, but I think today, everything that we're going to give you out of the box is going to require you to actually ship some data and the actual message from service to service. When will Service Fabric tooling be supported on Visual Studio 2017? Also, about when next year are you estimating stateful service support in Windows containers?
Let's do the 17th.
Part 1, you.
Part 1. Go look at the release notes. Anyway, so we just released the Visual Studio 2017 RC2 update a few weeks ago, this week, and the tooling is actually part of that now. You still need to get the SDK and runtime with the Web PI, which you've been used to for years 2015. Those are published, right? The bits are out there, it's just the release notes that aren't. Yes, like the bits beat the dog. One issue that we have right now is the .NET Core. Actually, we have an update coming out any day soon that will fix and enable you to do .NET Core services in VS 2017. Migration of .NET Core from VS 2015 or the X-Proj system into the new project system that .NET Core has in New Visual Studio still has some issues. You should be able to work around those via workarounds that are described in the release notes. But just be aware that since .NET Core has introduced a new project system in VS 2017, it's a one-way migration. So once you migrate these services into the new project system, you won't be able to go back and work with them in VS 2015.
Okay. And 3 minutes. Let's get through these.
Well, the container support, it'll be kind of...
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
You're going to get that sort of late Q1, beginning of Q2 next year-ish.
Yeah. That's going to be as the container story finalizes and firms up.
So...
is it possible to have in the future default exports versus C# generated methods?
RPC, yes, can you support C# methods? So not today, but it is in the backlog. No dates on that yet, but we're aware of this one for sure.
Yeah, a known thing.
Yeah.
So can we imagine which question are we on now?
This is Marcin again. Okay. So Marcin, the situation you would have is not that when you say data center partition occurs, you're talking about a network partition across two locations. Two locations, one of those locations is going to shut down. That's the situation. So there's what you should end up happening is that if those are separate clusters and the partition happens, sure, they're all spread in their own cluster and everything is consistent. But if you had them spread across a cluster and one half of the cluster shuts down, the whole cluster is going to shut down. For that to work, you need 3 locations and you need each replica set to be partitioned or spread across all 3 locations. So that, as you've envisioned it there, that's not quite how we would say it's built. And then the question is changing the partition scheme out of the services deployed going to be supported in the future? We don't know that we will ever change the partition scheme. Scheme is really what we think about in terms of it's partitioned via ints, it's partitioned via strings, or it's a singleton. What we are looking into is how to repartition the service after it's already running. So say you deployed a service with a partition scheme of 0 to long max, and then you said you wanted 10 partitions. What are the conditions under which that partition count can change? And can it change to things? Could it go down to 5 if each of those partitions is actually pretty cold? Could it go up to 100 or more if the partitions are really hot? And how and when do those splits occur? That is something that we're looking at. I don't have anything like a time frame for it, but it is active work that's ongoing in the team.
Is that really the last one?
No. Come on. All right. Way to go, Ben. Any plans to build configuration management of service within Fabric or Explorer?
Configuration management, like
kickoff upgrades and things. Like
No, I think this is more about I have a central config store. Is that what it means?
Config value changes. No, it means go to settings.xml and change some config setting, or go to the cluster manifest and change some setting there, and then roll that out. In
through the portal. You're talking about like how in cloud services you could go into the cloud services portal and make config changes and apply that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think we have plans.
We don't have any plans for that
yes.
currently.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No plans that I'm aware of.
No, nothing that I'm aware of at this time. Okay,
A couple more.
Okay. That was configuration management.
Yeah.
How many seconds is the timeout for actor methods to own turn-based concurrency after which concurrency exception is thrown? Is it possible to customize it?
I don't remember exactly what the time is.
What the default is?
Yeah, I don't remember what the default is. I know you can configure it, but we'll have to go and look that up. For
Yeah, we owe you a config documentation on that one.
Yeah.
Papers regarding design public? No, Marcin. Sorry, we're very tight-fisted around how this all works because it is actually quite different. Do you guys internally use event source, and do you also find it excruciating?
Leading question.
Leading question. Badgering the witness.
What part of it?
Yeah, some parts of it, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's way better than manually editing ETW manifests and doing stuff like that. Like it's. I like the code first kind of approach.
Yeah. So I did a service. We did a service on Service Fabric a while back where we did use event source, and the whole idea was around semantic logging, where logging was a first class construct in the service rather than kind of an afterthought. So everything was strongly typed right. So you had a method per log message. I wouldn't say it was excruciating. It's, it's a little bit. I guess it's a little bit like test-driven development. Right? It's a little more work. Yeah, it's more work up front, but long term, I think it was worth it. It was nice to have it ultimately.
It felt boilerplate-y. It felt like I was writing a lot of boilerplate code over and over again.
Feel that way, yeah.
But the benefits were very useful.
Pretty good. So yes, we do use it internally. I mean, it's going to depend on who's writing the service, but we do use it internally, at least at the company. Excruciating. I mean.
So I know
Carol
is in the meeting. I just want to call you out, Carol, because of the event flow. And event flow actually gives you the opportunity to not necessarily use event source as the instrument. I don't know if you want to comment, Carol. If you're still.
Did he run off as soon as that question popped up?
Yeah.
Like,
I think we actually support event flow supports system diagnostics that trace as well. So it's to help you set up the whole chain. Joe.
Yeah, it does support diagnostics tracing. And as to event flow, well, it has some words, but it also is quite helpful.
Okay, and for the actor timeout seconds, Aman here has confirmed it is 60 seconds. Thank you, Aman. Aman is one of our engineers on the actor framework.
Woohoo!
Thank you for all your hard work and for helping out today.
We're kind of wrapping it up. Let's see what else has trickled in here. On event flow, maybe Carol, you can send that out.
Yeah.
I did put a link in
earlier. Okay.
Yeah.
And can I consider an actor with state persistence non-equivalent to a stateless actor?
Sort of. I mean, it will essentially, it won't keep state in any reliable way. It's not exactly stateless. So we used to have way back in our preview, we used to have a stateless actor, but what we realized is that it's not truly stateful because each actor still has a unique actor ID. So if you send a message to a particular actor ID, you'll always end up at the same place. And we represent that as a stateful service because it's kind of a natural model. So they're not truly stateless. In a truly stateless model, if you send multiple messages to the same ID, it would just go all over the place. But this will always go to the same one.
Yeah, there wouldn't even be IDs, and method calls would just get invoked randomly.
It would be, yeah, exactly. It'd be like a stateless service or like a web server. So they don't hold your state permanently. So if the actor needs to fail over, you lose all your state. But it is still stateful in the sense that an actor ID maps to exactly one actor.
You will get back to the same actor object.
Yeah.
Whether or not that actor object remembers that you called it a second ago, it won't, and you shouldn't rely on it doing so.
That's a good way to put it. Right.
All right.
Okay.
I should change it to goodbye. We'll just leave you with our
wonderful
art picture, unless there's a last-minute burning question, but I think we're pretty much out of time here. And we'll see you in the new year.
Yeah.
We'll have one of these in January again.
Yep.
And every month we'll hold it about this time. I think we're
going to switch to a regular cadence, right?
Yeah.
Do we have a plan yet? Or
we got to pick what day, but it'll be like the last Thursday of the month or the third Thursday of the month or whatever, so you don't have to, you can build your calendar invite around it.
Oh, okay, so starting next year we'll start with
Q&A Thursday.
It'll be a Thursday of the month that we pick. Either the second to last or the last Thursday of every month.
There'll be some recurring schedule that you can actually count on.
Yes.
Yeah.
And outside of that, please continue to post your questions on Stack Overflow or Msdn forum. And as we showed at the beginning of this, there are other places to post issues to, like the GitHub for reporting bugs.
If you do have bugs, if you do find bugs or issues, please post those on the GitHub. The GitHub issues repo, because we can actually track them there and respond pretty well.
Tag them with bugs, or if you so bugs and actual issues go to the GitHub issues list.
That's best.
Any other just general questions can go to Msdn or Stack Overflow, as is your Purview.
Yes, that's one. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and Happy New Year.
Thanks, everyone. Happy New Year.
And
thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Christmas.
Right.
Yeah. Take it easy.
See ya.
Great job, guys. Great session.
Thanks. Okay. What do we do here?
Now
I'm done. There's going to be I'm done button.
Oh, the I'm done button.
Oh, hold on a second.
Wait. Cancel.
Cancel.
Yeah, cancel it.
We probably need to